Jamer shivered in the biting February wind. Nature started showing the first signs of upcoming spring. The sun peeked out, the puddles formed on the sidewalks and the street. Birds seemed to chirp with increased cheerfulness. Jamer was relieved that the harsh winter was over. It was her first winter spent on the streets. Long, icy, and unfriendly. With the warm weather, the girl dared to venture from her winter refuge to the city. The city offered better chances for finding food. Grocery stores, cafes, and restaurants always had recently expired food leftovers from the previous day that couldn't be served to customers. Jamer, who starved all winter, welcomed these opportunities. She had spent the winter in an abandoned house in the village, which she had stumbled upon in the fall. The overgrown, unattended plot was a clear sign of its own state. It was just what Jamer needed. That early November evening, she had understood the imminent arrival of freezing temperatures and the long, cold winter ahead. She needed shelter, and the house had a functioning furnace. Thankfully, Jam knew how to operate it, a skill she had learned from the cold wheels. She was grateful for at least that. She hunched her shoulders against a sudden chill. Goosebumps prickled her skin. Whether it was the lingering February cold or the memory of the family she had spent 2 years with, she couldn't tell. Perhaps it was a bit of both. Jamer had never met her parents and had no idea about their identities. As a newborn, she was wrapped in a cellophane bag and discarded in a trash can. Today, with surveillance cameras ubiquitous, such an act would likely lead to the perpetrator's arrest. However, the person who abandoned Jamer remained unknown, despite efforts to find them. Now, at the age of 15, Jamer was acutely aware that her biological mother had not wanted her. Perhaps her mother saw her as a mistake, a burden to be quickly discarded. Jamer grew up in an orphanage surrounded by indifferent caregivers and embittered children. Despite the difficulties, she always had a clean bed and food, a fact often emphasized by the adults as a reason for gratitude. Jamer accepted this as her normal, until she realized that many other children led very different lives. They had parents who loved and protected them, who hugged them goodnight, supported them in tough times, and comforted them when they cried. As Jamer matured, she began to have questions about how life functioned. The older children from the orphanage, some of whom had experienced life in a family, primarily satisfied her curiosity. "They are from homes, we are from the orphanage," the tall, skinny Lucy explained. "They have parents, and we were abandoned." "That's it, I wasn't abandoned," little Sam interjected, who had recently arrived at the orphanage, mostly silent and often in tears. He finally spoke up. "I have loving parents, but they were killed in a car accident. That's why I'm here." They would never have left me eventually. Jam discovered her own backstory. One night, the chatty nanny, Mrs. Stoltz, walked into the children's room to check if everything was all right, and she found Jamer awake, having been startled from a terrible dream. A common occurrence for her at the age of 8 or 9. Upon seeing Mrs. Stoltz, she scolded, "Why are you up?" "It's nighttime," the woman's eyebrows furrowed in annoyance. "I'll go to sleep now," the girl promised. It was better not to argue with Mrs. Stoltz, for she possessed a surprisingly heavy hand. "If you wake someone, you'll be punished." Understood, Jamer whispered, scolding herself internally for failing to pretend to be asleep earlier. But Mrs. Stoltz had already started her tirade. "We look after you, care for you. Your parents didn't want you, they discarded you like trash, and we have to exhaust ourselves for your sake." Yes, Mrs. Stoltz disliked children. Why she chose to work in an orphanage despite such contempt was a mystery to Jamer. Perhaps no one else would hire the grumpy woman due to her advanced age. Regardless, the fact remained Mrs. Stoltz was not just indifferent to children, she literally harbored hatred against them. Whether this was exclusive to orphans, Jamer didn't know. "You are all children of alcoholics and marginalized people," Mrs. Stoltz continued. The woman was apparently just venting, speaking into the void. "Nothing good will come out of you. You're destined to be slackers like your relatives. The apple never falls far from the tree. Why did they bother with you at all? If when your mother discarded you, you were lucky to be found in time." The old man couldn't sleep, you see. He went to take out the garbage at 5 a.m., and there you were. If he hadn't found you, it would have been less trouble for everyone. Are you talking about me? Jamer immediately asked. She wouldn't normally have dared to speak to Mrs. Stoltz, but the woman was apparently revealing her past. It was impossible to remain silent. Who else, Mrs. Stoltz shot Jamer a contemptuous look. Was I really thrown in the trash? Jam's voice quivered, tears welling in her eyes. She suddenly felt deeply. All the children who didn't know their parents often fantasized about their origins. Jam was no exception. She imagined stories where her mother had to leave her at the orphanage for her own good. She always hoped her mother would come back for her one day to take her away from this dreadful place. But this revelation hit her heart. So, you don't know Mrs. Stoltz asked, surprised. The whole staff knows about it. Hasn't anyone told you before? Jamer shook her head. Mrs. Stoltz smiled maliciously. Well, you should know. The old man found you in a garbage can and brought you here to the orphanage. Your mom must have been an alcoholic. That's how you are, just like the rest of them, Mrs. Stoltz relished in Jam's grief. She embellished her story with vivid details, describing the dirty supermarket cellophane bag the man found the newborn in. She explained how they searched for Jam's mother in the neighborhood and the homeless shelter, but to no avail. You were diagnosed with so many conditions we thought you'd end up disabled if you survived at all. Your mother must have drunk and smoked during her pregnancy. That's why no one adopted you when you were young. Too many illnesses. And now you're older, who would want such a burden after Mrs. Stoltz left. Jamer lay awake and motionless for a long time, mulling over the caregiver's words. Maybe Mrs. Stoltz lied. Possibly she was teasing me deliberately to hurt me. The next morning the girl, having gathered courage, approached one of the educators. She had been working in the orphanage for a long time, surely she must know her story. But the woman confirmed everything. Yes, you were indeed found in a garbage can by an elderly man, quite accidentally. He even wanted to take you away afterward to raise you like a daughter or granddaughter, rather. But who would give a baby to a lonely old man? So, it's true. The girl started crying because it was the end of her childhood dreams of suddenly having parents. Lucy, who had already turned 12, came to Jam in the dining room and sat next to her. Lucy, not that they were friends, the girls were too different in age for a full-fledged friendship, but Lucy treated Jamer with some warmth. Lucy had once had a younger sister. The girl loved her very much, took care of her, and then someone from the guests of Lucy's mother left an unextinguished cigarette on the table. There was a fire, which killed everyone in the house. Only Lucy managed to escape by some miracle. That's how the girl ended up in an orphanage. Lucy often said that she had no pity for her mother. She drank, did not care about her daughters, took to the house of her many friends and suitors, arranged parties from night until morning. But Lucy really missed her little sister. Likely, Jamer reminded Lucy of her sister, and she was the only one at the orphanage who treated Jam warmly. What's wrong? Lucy asked. Did the boys hurt you again, or did the teacher punish you? Jam confided in her older friend, who smiled sadly in response. Well, everyone here has a sad story. You were abandoned in the trash right after you were born, which is surely unpleasant, but Ben's mother sold him to gypsies, and Molly's grandmother tried to sell her. She even put an ad in the newspaper. But why? Why don't parents want their children? I don't know. Lucy shrugged, gently stroking James' head. It happens. I think about it a lot too, but try to imagine. Imagine you never had parents. It's easier that way. It's as if you've always been alone, and nobody ever abandoned you. Jam managed to cope with her feelings. What else could she do? Life at the orphanage continued as usual: early risings, exercises, classes, and gym. But suddenly, something unexpected happened to Jam. At the age of 12, she was adopted by a family. Jamer understood that her chances of adoption were slim. People usually preferred to adopt babies or toddlers, but she was already a teenager. Furthermore, her appearance wasn't commonly favored. She had bright black eyes, widely set dark eyebrows, swai skin, and raven black hair. Your mom probably got scared looking at you and ran off, Mrs. Stoltz used to jest spitefully. Don't listen to her, Lucy always reassured Jamer. You are incredibly beautiful, a real photo model. I wish I had your eyebrows and eyelashes, mine are so pale. But you're a real beauty. In short, Jam's chances of finding a family were almost non-existent, and she knew it. And then this happened: a family wanted to meet her. The head of the orphanage once told Jamer, they want to adopt a teenager from the orphanage. It's rare they're interested in you. Be ready tomorrow. Jam was nervous about the upcoming meeting. She had given up hope of finding a family, but suddenly potential parents appeared. She feared they might not like her and was anxious about seeing disappointment in their eyes. The thought of herself finding the prospective parents unpleasant never occurred to her. Jamer yearned for guardians who would take care of her, protect her, and guide her into adulthood in this daunting, confusing world. She had no knowledge of life outside the orphanage, which made the future seem terrifying. But if she could find a loving and understanding mother and father, then she had nothing to fear. On the morning before the meeting with the potential adopter, Jam woke up early, washed her face, combed her hair, and got dressed. With nothing to do, she spent a long time wandering the orphanage corridor. Lucy came to support her. Everything will be all right, she smiled. Jamer, you're so lucky. I'm already 16, there's no hope left for me. I'm so happy for you. Jamer immediately took a liking to Anna and Peter Caldwell. They sat at the table next to the cheerful principal. They appeared kind-hearted, simple, tidy, and polite. Anna wore a strict blouse and a long skirt, while Peter was in a fully buttoned shirt and classic trousers. The couple didn't appear very modern, but Jamer liked that. They didn't resemble her brightly made-up and flamboyantly dressed teachers. It was a refreshing change. They were modest people with excellent taste. And this is our Jamer, the principal introduced. Jamer, a very good girl, quiet, calm, obedient. We never had any problems with her. Jamer had never heard so many kind words about herself. She liked the way she was being introduced to the Caldwells. Jamer, Peter smiled at the girl. Do you want to find a family? Does she want a family? Yes. This is her most cherished wish. Jamer struggled to find words to express the depth of her feelings, so she simply nodded in agreement. That's good, Anna rejoiced, giving the girl a warm smile. We live outside the city on a large farm with chickens, ducks, and geese. We also have more children. You'll have brothers and sisters. You don't mind, do you? No, of course not, answered Jamer, thinking that if these brothers and sisters treated her like Lucy did, she would be more than happy. The Caldwells engaged in an hour-long conversation with Jamer, expressing genuine interest in her likes, dislikes, thoughts, dreams, and aspirations. The warmth of their interaction made Jamer feel comfortable and needed. They seemed to appreciate her, and their approval made Jamer feel as if she was spreading wings. In early April, the Caldwells brought Jamer into their home, into her new life. She was immediately taken with everything. They lived in a large wooden house outside the city, complete with a garden, various outbuildings, a garage, a barn, a chicken coop, and a summer kitchen. Jamer got her own small and modestly furnished room. Having been used to sharing a bedroom with 15 others, she could barely believe her luck. Instantly, Jam was part of a large family. The new mother, father, 5 brothers, and 4 sisters warmly welcomed her, showing her around the house and introducing the myriad of pets that included goats, ducks, chickens, cows, rabbits, 2 dogs, and 4 cats. Jamer was thrilled. The small collection of hamsters and turtles at the orphanage paled in comparison to the Caldwell menagerie. Anna, Peter, and the other children taught Jamer how to care for the animals. The girl felt needed and loved. It was the custom of the family to gather for breakfast, lunch, and dinner around the long table in the living room. The girls helped their mother set the table, seated everyone, then prayed and began to eat, obeying their parents. It was a rule that Jamer abided by without difficulty. She felt loved and cared for in this new home. Every night, Anna would hug Jamer, bless her, and kiss her forehead, which Jamer found comforting. Although Peter was more reserved and stern, he often praised Jamer for her quick adaptation and learning. She learned to tend the garden and care for the cattle, tasks she had never been taught in the orphanage, where the children weren't even responsible for washing their own dishes. The children studied at home because their school was far away in a neighboring village, and the Cordwells lived on a secluded farm. Attending school wasn't practical, so the children had online lessons at scheduled times, not daily. Jamer preferred this arrangement as it was less intense than her previous schooling in the orphanage. She had more spare time for walking, interacting with her siblings, and playing with animals. Of course, she had to help Anna with the household chores, but Jamer was only happy to do them. After all, it's so nice to be needed by someone, to feel part of the family. In general, she was overjoyed to be in such a wonderful place, and her life seemed to her full of promise. The Cordwells had rules which took some getting used to. First, as was mentioned, children were required to obey their parents. Secondly, the family prayed before each meal and at specified times in the morning and evening. Jamer quickly learned the prayers, so this wasn't a challenge. The family also had a specific dress code. The girls wore long skirts and modest blouses, which Anna and her older daughters sewed themselves. The female family members kept their hair up in tight braids or simple buns. Loose hair was considered inappropriate. This is exactly how a well-bred girl should look. Peter praised Jamer's appearance, not like those promiscuous girls from the city. Jamer wasn't as pleased. She used to enjoy wearing her shiny black hair down, thinking she resembled the girls in shampoo commercials. However, she accepted that her new parents knew best and had their best interests at heart. There were no irritable nannies, angry children, gray orphanage walls, or bland food. Her new siblings treated her kindly, and they often played in the yard after chores. It was lovely. The only person missing was Lucy, but Jamer was hopeful that Lucy would soon leave the orphanage and they could reunite. She was sure Anna and Peter would allow Lucy to visit her. Despite rarely having guests, Jam's optimistic outlook shattered about 2 months after moving in with the Cordwells. Jamer was taking out the garbage behind the house when she heard a sound. It was the rapid chime of a bell coming from the garden. Mary Jam's little sibling flinched. "The bell is ringing, we must go to the garden." "Hayes is about to be punished," she said. Hayes. Jamer was surprised. Hayes was one of their older brothers. He had returned from town later than agreed upon the previous day. He periodically went to the market to sell dairy products from their farm. He looked like a grown-up guy, so Peter and Anna let him go alone. After the market, he was permitted to visit his old school friends who lived in town. However, he was obliged to return home by a certain time, and yesterday he was late. Peter shook his head regretfully, and Anna sighed. Hayes looked so unhappy and scared that Jamer felt that this was already punishment enough for him. The siblings watched him with sympathy. Jamer thought the matter was over, but it wasn't, and now Jam followed Mary into the garden, hopeful that everything might turn out all right. Everyone else was already there. Anna held a bell in her hands. "I wonder where the parents found this rare item," she mused. Peter looked serious, even solemn. Next to him stood a pale, frightened Hayes, clearly apprehensive. He nevertheless resigned himself to his fate. In Peter's hands was a belt, a thick leather strap with a metal buckle. Jamer didn't notice it right away, only later when the punishment instrument had already gone into action. "A son must obey and honor his parents," Peter declared, surveying his many children. He didn't even glance at the faulty Hayes. "A parent's word is law. Those who stray from their parents' commands will face an unhappy fate. We want all our children to be happy and successful, which is why we cannot tolerate disobedience." "If you spare the rod, you spoil the child," Anna added, looking sympathetically at Hayes. "We love you, son. We cannot let you fall. You must be punished." Hayes sighed heavily and nodded in acceptance. Then something terrible occurred. Peter began to whip Hayes with a belt, targeting his back, legs, and shoulders. With each blow, his hits became increasingly vicious, as if he derived pleasure from it. Jam watched her new father in horror. His eyes glowed with a perverse delight. There were aspects of him that reminded her of Mrs. Stoltz, but at least she never resorted to physical violence or masked her anger as care. A robust, tall man was beating a frail, defenseless boy. Hayes's body, quickly marked with red, swollen welts, some even began to bleed. The pain must have been excruciating. "Endure it," whispered Mary, who was standing next to Jamer. "Just endure, or he will hurt you even more." Jamer felt sick to her stomach, wishing the horrifying scene unfolding before her was just a nightmare. How could Anna and Peter, such kind and virtuous individuals, allow such cruelty? Peter was doing it, and Anna was silently condoning it, and the other children. They observed Hayes's beating with unsettling calmness, showing sympathy for him but clearly accepting it as normal. Even in the orphanage, things were never this brutal. The staff might spank someone, maybe even pinch them, but that was it. The children had regular medical examinations and adults were asked for every bruise. But here, Hayes fell down and seemed to lose consciousness for a while. Jamer feared that the boy would die. Now, Peter whipped the teenager a few more times, then suddenly calmed down. "This is a lesson for you and the others," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Go to your room, you'll be locked up for 2 days without food." Anna helped her son up and led him into the house. He was shaky. The others returned to their chores as if nothing had happened. "Let's go," Mary said, pulling the stunned Jamer by the arm. "We've got to clean up after the house, right? Did you see what happens for disobedience?" From that moment, fear nestled in Jam's heart. She worried about doing something wrong and ending up like Hayes, standing in the garden, awaiting punishment. The mere thought made her heart clench. The Cardwells no longer seemed wise, kind, or understanding to her. They were frightening. What had once seemed nice and pleasant to Jamer now appeared in an entirely different light. The children lived like hermits, isolated from people, under the control of 2 oppressive adults. They cared for livestock, worked in the vegetable garden, barely studied, and only interacted with each other. The once safe and kind world created by the Caldwells no longer felt that way to Jamer. She began to think that staying in the orphanage would have been better. But there was no turning back now. The Caldwells were unlikely to let her leave. The Cordells were strict. Those who disagreed were stubborn or slow. Now Jamer often saw them punish the children for the smallest offenses, like poorly executed tasks. The severity of the punishment matched the offense. Sometimes children were locked in a room without food and water for days or made to stand in a corner on peas for hours. More serious misconduct led to public floggings in the garden, with a bell summoning everyone to witness the punishment. The discipline was not just limited to the boys. Once, Peter beat his eldest daughter, Aisha, for simply browsing swimsuits online. Peter and Anna feared their daughter might become a vicious woman, with Peter vowing to prevent that by beating her with a belt. Aisha held back her screams, knowing that would only make Peter angrier. Jamer also faced her share of troubles, primarily for arguing with her parents. One day Mary was hungry, but it was a long time until lunch, and her pleas fell on deaf ears. Unable to wait, the little girl took a piece of pie without permission. Anna saw it and informed her husband about it. Peter accused his youngest daughter of theft and retrieved a belt from the closet. Mary and Jamer, who were also present in the kitchen at that time, understood its meaning. Mary trembled like a leaf but dared not cry or beg for mercy. Jamer, imagining her father punishing the little girl in front of everyone, felt a cold sweat on her back. Without thinking twice, she stood up for her sister, politely and cautiously asking Peter and Anna to forgive Mary for her minor transgression. As a result, Peter punished both daughters with the belt, Mary for stealing, and Jamer for disrespecting her parents. Jamer felt that their punishment was less severe than that of their older siblings, but she still cried from the pain, the indignity, and the sense of helplessness. Also, Jamer often found herself left in the basement without light or food for days on end. This experience was even more dreadful than public floggings. In the pitch-black darkness, she began to fear that she was forgotten, that she may never see the light again. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly during her 2 years at the Cardwells' house. Jamer endured various forms of punishment: floggings, confinement, kneeling on dry peas for an hour, deprivation of food and water. She was forbidden from going to town. Only the older children would occasionally leave the farm to help their parents sell their homegrown produce, meat, dairy products, and vegetables. Jam understood that her circumstances were not normal, yet she had no one to confide in. If any of the children became ill, they were cared for by Anna, with no doctor even being called. The children received their education through an online school, watching recorded lessons and submitting projects via email once a quarter. Even this lifeline to the outside world was tightly controlled. Peter would disable the internet after classes, and only he knew the password. This made it impossible for Jamer to reach out for help online. The Culwells ruled unchallenged over their adopted children, who considered their circumstances as normal. Most of these boys and girls had joined the family as infants and knew no other life. Peter and Anna convinced the children that the world beyond their fence was perilous, brutal, vicious, and unjust. They asserted that safety could only be found within their farm. However, Jamer knew this was untrue. She yearned to escape and reveal the truth to those outside. Peter often visited the village and had friends there, but no one ever visited their home. And it was understandable, as people would have known something was wrong here. Jamer was desperate to find an escape route. The fence was tall, smooth, and impenetrable. Trees grew far from it, a placement that seemed deliberate. Scaling the dauntingly high fence seemed impossible. Even if she could find a ladder, someone would surely notice her attempt to escape. There were always family members around, and they kept a close watch on each other. Jam's new siblings truly believed that the world beyond the fence was unjust, vicious, and hostile. They accepted the Caldwells' harsh punishments as normal, oblivious to the damage these cruel individuals inflicted on their lives. If any of them discovered Jam's plan to escape, they would either thwart her attempts or immediately report her to the adults. Despite this, they weren't inherently malicious children. They were kind and modest, treating each other well and offering mutual support. However, the Culwells had raised them to betray each other without remorse. They had been conditioned to believe that they were helping the offender by reporting their wrongdoings. If one of them saw the other misstep or violate one of the parental prohibitions, this witness would tell the father or mother what happened. They were sure they were doing a good deed and saving a lost soul. Jam had witnessed such incidents many times, each more terrifying than the punishment her foster father's belt could deliver. Once, Jam herself was penalized for not reporting her younger sister. Stacy had accidentally knocked over a bucket left by their eldest sister at the barn's entrance. The milk spilled, startling Stacy. Jam, having witnessed the incident, tried to comfort her. "Don't worry," assured Jam, "no one saw you. If anyone asks, we'll just say the cat did it." Stacy looked at Jam in disbelief, seemingly shocked by her sister's words. However, their plan didn't work out. A couple of hours later, a bell rang in the garden, signaling that punishment was imminent. Peter was going to discipline Stacy for spilling the milk, and Jam was planning to lie to their parents and protect the guilty party. It turned out that Mary had witnessed the incident at the barn. Even the honest and well-meaning child, she immediately reported the event to Peter in good faith. The siblings were convinced that their parents were merely caring for them, that punishment was a form of purification. The Caldwells succeeded in instilling their rules and thoughts into the minds of the adopted children, but Jam was the exception. Perhaps her resistance stemmed from joining the family as a teenager rather than a little child. To survive, Jamer played along, trying hard to avoid rousing suspicion while desperately seeking an opportunity to escape. However, the foster parents were not entirely fooled. They scrutinized Jamer more closely than the others, severely limiting her freedom. Jamer saw no opportunities to break free or communicate her situation to others. The adults were too cautious to let her outside. Once, they intercepted her paper airplane in a desperate plea for help. Jam had written a letter, folded it into an airplane, and launched it over the fence. She hoped the makeshift plane could overcome the barrier she couldn't, and that someone would find the note. It worked, but the finder turned out to be Peter himself. Jamer was brutally beaten. She thought she was going to be killed. Afterward, she was thrown into her basement and left there for several days without food or water. She experienced unbearable thirst and painful wounds while time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Later, she had a long conversation with Peter and Anna. They continued to feed her their pseudo-religious beliefs, intimidating her with tales of hell and hellfire, assuring her that their only intention was to save her. Jam meekly nodded, thinking to herself that these people must be either criminals or mad. It would be best not to argue with them. Then Peter said something that made Jamer shudder. "You now officially have a psychiatric diagnosis," he said. looking straight into Jam's eyes. "It's in your medical records. You've been prescribed potent medication. Delusions and strange fantasies are symptoms of your disease. You can write all the notes you want now, no one will believe you. Nobody, but how did you do it?" Jamer exclaimed in shock. She knew that to receive a diagnosis, one would need to see a doctor. With Stacy's help, Anna explained, "You're almost the same age, and you're very much alike, so she played along for your salvation. We took Stacy to the doctor, she's in the hospital now. When she gets out, you'll be an official psychiatric disability." Peter smiled, looking at the girl's confused face. "We had to do something. Had to keep ourselves safe." Anna waved her hands. "You forced us to go to such measures." Jamer grinned. Good cop, bad cop, classic of the genre. The girl realized she was now officially a mental patient. That means whether she screams or calls for help, no one will believe her. It's a terrible situation, and her chances of breaking free and living a normal life are practically null. But Jamer was not going to give up. Staying in the Cordwell house and living by their rules for many years was not for her. The Cordwells were making far-reaching plans. They wanted to move to the hinterland and join the sect, a community that lived in the forests away from people, survived by subsistence farming, and rejected all the benefits of civilization. For Peter, they were an ideal he aspired to. Jam understood perfectly well that after this move, she wouldn't be able to escape. The whole community would be watching her. Then one day, the real opportunity to escape presented itself to Jamer. Peter, while on his way to the town market, had forgotten to lock the door. He had assumed Hayes would do it, but Hayes, engrossed in the workshop, had not heard his father's request. Jamer, who was weeding the vegetable garden, saw everything. Mary was with her, because from that point forward, one of the siblings always accompanied her as ordered by Peter and Anna. They wanted to keep a close eye on their defiant stepdaughter, as they did not trust her, despite her attempts to appear docile and defeated. Upon seeing the ajar door, Jam's heart pounded fiercely. "This is my chance to escape. Even though I'm not prepared, my things aren't packed, and I don't have a plan, I must seize this opportunity. Another chance like this may never come again." Slowly, Jamer straightened up, dusted off her hands, checked that Peter's car was safely away, and then sprinted toward the open door. "Stop. Where are you going?" Mary's surprised and thin voice trailed behind her. Jamer didn't even turn around. Of course, she knew that her escape would result in consequences for everyone. All the children would be punished for not keeping an eye on her. Mary and Hayes, who failed to close the door in time, would face the harshest punishment. However, Jamer couldn't afford to worry about that now. She ran out the gate and surveyed her surroundings. It had been a long time since she had seen such openness. A wide field lay ahead, bisected by a country road which Peter used to travel to town. Jam was aware of a nearby village where she could seek help. She just had to get there. Knowing Mary would rouse everyone, and that her older brothers, who were fast and strong, would pursue her, Jamer ran with all her might. Realizing that she couldn't outrun her brothers on the open road, she veered into the cornfield and plunged inside it. From here she couldn't even see the road, but she was confident she was heading in the right direction. She remembered exactly where to go. Navigating through the dense growth was challenging. Fresh scratches added to the scars and wounds from past punishments. Swarms of insects were a nuisance, buzzing around the fugitive. Despite these discomforts, Jamer found this better than being confined within the Cordwell house. She was finally free and even felt a noticeable ease in her breathing. The feeling of being outdoors, the freedom to wander wherever her feet led her, and the ability to breathe in deeply was exhilarating, especially after almost 2 years of captivity. She soon approached a village but hesitated to leave the cover of the corn. She needed to survey the area first. The area appeared serene with its quiet streets, cozy houses, and low multicolored fences that offered glimpses of people's gardens and vegetable patches. They were ordinary homes, a stark contrast to the Cordwells' impenetrable fortress. However, the girl soon realized that the village was surprisingly bustling. Jamer observed people in the streets and groups of adults and teenagers wandering around the outskirts of the village. She wondered if they were searching for her, and soon her suspicions were confirmed when she spotted her brother's bicycle lying in the grass beside the first house in the village. At that moment she understood the situation. The brothers hastily alerted the villagers about their sister's disappearance, describing her as mentally ill. The entire village was now searching for her. A group of middle-aged women came dangerously close to Jam's hiding place. "We should search the fields and forest," one suggested. "That poor thing, she's probably seeking solitude and silence. Our forest is quiet and peaceful. She's likely hiding there. The men are already searching the woods with dogs," another woman added. "If she's there, they'll find her. Poor girl," a third woman sighed. "She's so young and already diagnosed. It's only going to get worse. She should be returned to the family. They care for her. They treat her. They're literally holy people." "I would say they are fools," interjected a woman with thin lips and a prickly demeanor. "Why would they adopt children with disabilities from the orphanage? It's a burden for them, and it's not fair to the other children to have to live with such challenges." "Are you heartless?" another woman disagreed. "Those children are human too. They say this girl suffers from her delusional fantasies and even self-harms. They have to restrain her during episodes. She belongs in a hospital, in a secure ward with padded walls," insisted the woman with thin lips. "It would be better for everyone, including the girl." "They're planning on it," the second person said. "I overheard that if they catch the girl, they'll admit her to the hospital immediately. She has an official diagnosis, so there will be no argument about her admission. They'll give her medications, provide her with care. She'll come out an entirely different person. The disease won't disappear, of course, but they'll be able to manage her symptoms." The women conversed briefly before departing, leaving Jamer alone with her thoughts. She reflected on her predicament in light of their conversation. She realized she couldn't reach out to the villagers for help. They all sided with the Cordwells. Peter had convinced them that he was caring for a mentally unstable daughter. Now that she had run away, they wouldn't believe her if she tried to reveal the truth to them. She was mentally ill, prone to delusions and hallucinations. If she approached them, they would send her back to the Caldwells, who might commit her to a hospital. There, her pleas would fall on deaf ears due to the grim diagnosis in her medical record. Jamer had pinned her hopes on her scars, thinking they would serve as evidence of her mistreatment. However, the villagers believed the runaway girl was inclined to self-harm. This too was a dead end. Peter had cleverly manipulated every possible outcome. Jamer resolved to head for the town as it offered her a better chance to get help and potentially save the other Caldwell's children. She hoped they might receive assistance from psychologists or psychiatrists who could help them see the true nature of their foster parents. Time was of the essence. She had heard that search parties with dogs would soon scour the area. Jay ran faster than she ever had before, knowing the direction of the town and hurrying towards it. She didn't stop even when night fell, seemingly unaffected by fatigue. Fueled by adrenaline, Jamer endured a challenging day-long journey, reaching the town by 6 a.m. She was conscious of her disheveled appearance, a long skirt with a ragged hem, a dirty shirt with messy hair. Fortunately, the streets were deserted at that hour. She needed to find the police station, which would surely offer the help she sought. However, as she was about to take a step forward, she noticed a flyer on a pole that stopped her in her tracks. It was an ordinary A4-sized flyer, but it bore her picture. The text beneath quickly made her realize she couldn't seek help in the town either. The Caldwells had outmaneuvered her, reporting her to the police and even distributing flyers. The text stated that a girl with a psychiatric diagnosis was missing and provided a description matching Jamer. The flyer cautioned the public to be wary when encountering the teenager, as her diagnosis could lead to unpredictable behavior. Jamer did not go to the police. Instead, she sought refuge in an abandoned part of town and found shelter in a dilapidated house, where she finally fell asleep, overcome with exhaustion. She fell into a deep sleep almost instantly. When she awoke, the sun was already high in the sky, and her mind was clearer. Sitting up and hugging her knees, Jamer leaned against the wall, ready to contemplate her situation. Her prospects were bleak, but she faced the reality with courage. She reasoned, "I can't go to the police, they already know about me. I shouldn't go to the orphanage either, they've probably been warned as well. No one will help me now. People know a disturbed girl is missing and are ready for the runaway to start spouting delusions." The Coldwells have thought of everything. They must have anticipated that I would eventually flee and seek help, and have ensured that everyone would consider me unstable. The only option left is to stay on the streets. I can't return to the Coldwells' house, and I have nowhere else to go either. Jamer sighed, knowing it would be challenging. If there were no other options, she would have to start a new life. Firstly, she desired to shed her uniform, the drab attire she was obliged to wear at the Cardwells' house. She yearned to appear as a regular teenager, attracting less attention. Jam was aware that people often left bags of usable clothes near trash bins. That's where she sought her new wardrobe, and she found it. After changing into a sweatshirt and baggy jeans, Jamer immediately felt more comfortable and decided that her life was going to improve. Initially, Jade joined the street children at the train station. These were boys and girls with complex backgrounds, forced to survive on the streets. They all slept collectively in an old house, curiously located in the city center. This district was historical, boasting a beautiful street lined with lanterns, monuments, fountains, and stylish cafes. At all hours, it bustled with well-dressed people, families, stylish youths, loving couples, and elegant seniors. Just a stone's throw away from a row of shops and cafes, hidden behind them was an alleyway. This was home to old, crumbling houses and sidewalks overtaken by tall weeds. It served as a haven for the poor and destitute, a home for the homeless. The inhabitants would scatter like cockroaches whenever the police visited. Some were caught, but the agile and swift street kids always managed to escape. Each of these children had complex circumstances. Some were runaways, others fugitives from the law. Their shared trait was a desire to avoid adult intervention. Jamer was not fond of the street kids. Though they all lived on the streets, she preferred cleanliness. While her new friends disregarded hygiene and order, they were thieves, and despite their attempts to teach her, Jamer could not bring herself to steal. What distressed her most was these children's consumption of alcohol and cigarettes. According to one boy, it was their way of making the world nicer for them. The more time Janice spent with them, the more she realized this life was not for her. So one day she left without a word. Jam had another plan. She knew winter was approaching, and she needed to find a place to spend the colder months. She believed that place could be found in the nearest villages, an area likely filled with abandoned houses. After exploring many properties on a chilly November morning, she finally found what she was looking for: an abandoned wooden house. It seemed almost welcoming, eager for a new inhabitant. The house's interior suggested that an elderly woman had once lived there, with antique furniture, crocheted doilies on all surfaces, and a colorful rug on the floor. It was cozy but needed a thorough cleaning. Jam happily cleaned the single room and small kitchen, sweeping the floors and dusting off surfaces. Then she lit the furnace using the abundant firewood from the yard. The house quickly warmed, becoming cozy and inviting. Jam mentally thanked the Cordwell for teaching her how to heat a house, a skill that was proving invaluable. Her life was quiet and routine. The house was a safe haven for her, providing comfort and security. Jam fetched water from the nearest lake for cooking and hygiene, carrying the heavy bucket back to the house. She then boiled the water on the hot furnace to kill any germs. Despite the challenges, the girl found this way of life bearable. Jam found warm clothes at the dump, situated roughly a kilometer from her new shelter. It was fortunate that people frequently left bags filled with items still in good condition at the entrance. The dump was a treasure trove of useful items such as furniture, toys, and books. Jam would occasionally visit, much like one would a store, browsing and selecting items. However, obtaining food was a challenge. Unlike in the city where cafes and restaurants were plentiful, the remote location of the house offered limited options. Jam used to rely on discarded food from city eateries, which often discarded perfectly edible meals. Despite these challenges, Jam had a solution. There were many abandoned houses in the neighborhood that were easy to get into, and the girl learned to spot such residences. The cellars of such houses were filled with jars of pickles or jam. Some of these jars had been untouched for so long that their lids had turned black. Jam would take a few jars from these cellars, although it was practically theft. She believed the owners would not notice a few missing jars among their abundant stock. Jam preferred to get food in the city, but the frosty winter days confined her to the house. It was unthinkable to travel to the city in such cold. Jam could stay warm and content in the house, reading children's fairy tales by candlelight in an old creaky armchair she found. The magical stories fascinated her. On such cold days when Jam was confined to her house, she often pondered her future. Would she spend her life alone in an old cottage? She dismissed this thought, knowing that eventually the old lady heirs would sell it, and she'd have to find a new place. This cycle of uncertainty made her feel bitter. It was tough to be alone and unneeded. Jam missed having someone special in her life. She once had Lucy, but she didn't know where she was now. Would they ever reunite? The realization that no one else cared for her was painful and difficult to accept. However, as the thaw began and the sun emerged, Jam's spirits lifted. She looked forward to her walks and yearned for food other than pickles and jam. One day after a week of warm weather, Jam took her usual path to the city, admiring the soft blue sky and basking in the gentle sunlight. It was so warm that she unbuttoned her down jacket, a treasure she'd found at the dump during late fall. In the city, everything had worked out perfectly. Many cafes had held weddings and anniversaries the day before, resulting in plenty of leftovers. Jam had 2 full bags, enough to last a long time. She planned to store it outside in the snow, almost like a refrigerator, and it would feed her for a long time. It was splendid. However, an unexpected event occurred. The sky suddenly turned gray, making the atmosphere cold and uncomfortable. What seemed like a beautiful spring day a couple of hours ago had abruptly turned wintry as a biting wind blew and sparsely snow sprinkled from a dark cloud. Jam, in despair, glanced at the sky. She realized it would be very challenging, if not impossible, to get home in this weather. But she had to act, not just stand there and wait for the unknown. Jam hurriedly started her journey towards the city exit. The way was long, and given the weather, it would probably take her until night to reach. She accelerated her pace, almost running, until exhaustion set in. Outside the city, she then trudged along the bypass road, taking cover behind a wall of stunted, leafless trees. Now she could not move as quickly and crawled forward at a turtle's pace, realizing she might not make it to the cottage. Jamer regretted her decision. Why did I leave the city? At least there I could have waited out the bad weather in the shopping center. I could have stayed in the city for a few days, warming up on the heating duct with my old friends. Yes, it's risky, but choosing to go home was even riskier. Jamer was shivering, the cold penetrating to her bones. Her down jacket offered no warmth, her face burned with frostbite, her eyes watering. She ventured out to the road. Because of the snow and wind, visibility was nearly zero, and darkness was rapidly setting in. But at least cars were passing by, their headlights piercing the gloom. Jam knew she was close to collapsing into the snow, which would quickly bury her, and she would only be found in the real spring when the snow melted. But by then it would be too late. Maybe it's all right after all. Nobody needs me. Nobody will even miss me, she thought. Cars sped by her, perhaps drivers didn't notice Jamer in the glare of their headlights. As she kept a safe distance from the curb, and even if they did, who would care about her? A 3-legged dog limped past the girl, and the dog glanced at each other and continued on their separate paths. They both realized that they were probably doomed. Suddenly, Jamer heard the screech of brakes. She halted and turned around. An SUV had pulled up by the curb. The driver, a tall, handsome man who seemed straight out of a movie, jumped out, leaving the door open. He was dressed in a coat, stylish sneakers, and jeans. He was hatless, which made sense given the warmth inside the car. The man ran after a dog. He must have noticed the limping animal by the roadside and decided to help. From there, Jamer acted on autopilot. She turned and sprinted towards the car, seeking refuge from the cold. The inviting warmth was within reach. While the man was busy attending to the dog, Jamer swiftly slipped into the back seat. The interior was welcoming with soft seats, a faint citrus aroma, a soothing melody playing, and most importantly, it was warm. The comforting environment made her cheeks and arms tingle and her head spin slightly. Jamer watched the man petting the dog on the curb. The animal wagged its tail in response, reminding her that even animals need care and attention. Suddenly, something caught Jam's eye. She turned and gasped. There was a child seat with a small passenger, a little girl in it. The semi-darkness in the cabin had initially hidden the child from her. Jam was startled, wondering how the child must feel seeing a stranger entering the car. Jam had no intention of scaring the little girl, and it seemed she hadn't. The child remained in her seat, presumably asleep. The young passenger was garbed like a princess in a white, rhinestone-embroidered jumpsuit with a fur-lined hood, silver boots, and a hat featuring a large white pom-pom. 2 blonde pigtails peeked out from beneath the hat. Jamer examined her more closely and gasped in shock. The child's face was inanimate. Her chubby cheeks, rosy lips, and glassy blue eyes stared into the distance, devoid of human warmth. Jam's heart started hammering against her ribs at breakneck speed. In the child's car seat sat not a child but a doll, a large doll as tall as a real child, dressed in fancy attire. Why would anyone do this? The car's owner must be insane, she thought. Despite her reluctance to linger in the plush interior of the beautiful car, Jamer knew she should leave. But it was too late. The man was already returning to the SUV, cradling an old dog carefully in his arms. There was no way the girl could slip past him unnoticed, and this man, he must be a terrifying person. It wasn't normal to transport a doll like this, was it? The man opened the back door to settle the dog on the seat. His gaze met Jam's eyes, filled with terror and despair. The girl leapt out the opposite door and dashed into the field, sinking knee-deep into the snow. However, the man pursued her. He caught up with her swiftly, seized her arm, and spun her around. He's going to hit me, Jam thought, struggling to break free. But escape was impossible. The man's grip was unyielding. I didn't take anything from you, Jamer protested. I'm not like that. I'm just homeless. I want only to warm up. Please let me go. Wait, the man stopped her. How did you end up here? It's far from the city, even further from the nearest village. Where are you from? I'm homeless. I live in an abandoned house in the village. Homeless? The man's eyebrows shot up in surprise. What's your name? Jamer, the girl answered honestly. The man seemed normal, even safe. However, she had seen that terrifying doll in his parlor. Jamer, it seems like you're in trouble. Teenagers shouldn't live alone like this, and it's a long way to the country estate. You won't make it. You'll freeze on the way. Can I at least give you a ride? Jamer shook her head, thinking, stay in the car with that horrible doll. No way. I see. The man sighed. You saw the doll and got scared. Is that right? Jamer nodded. Well, it does look creepy, I agree. But it's just a doll. It has its own unique story. There's no need to be scared of it. Let's get in the car quickly. You're already freezing. Jamer looked at the man with fear. She desperately wanted to return to the warmth, but what kind of man was he? A normal adult wouldn't carry a terrifying toy like a real child in a car seat. The man noticed the girl's puzzled expression, sighed heavily, and said, I'll tell you about the doll on the way. It's not easy, but otherwise you'll stay here and freeze to death out here. Jamer, now intrigued, focused on the man. She was eager to hear the story. By the way, I haven't introduced myself yet, the man added with a smile. My name is Jeff. You can call me that. Jam nodded in response. She looked at Jeff, waiting. She was eager to unravel the mystery of the doll and perhaps return to the warmth of the car afterward, unaffected by the cold wind and snow covering them. Jeff began his tale, and both of them were engrossed by the story. It captivated them completely. Since childhood, Jeff was in love with his classmate Helen. However, she, drawn to bolder, more reckless boys, overlooked him despite his feelings. Jeff was unsure of how to act. This dynamic shifted when they encountered each other at university. A chance meeting led to frequent conversations, and they soon became inseparable. Helen began to see Jeff in a new light, realizing how wonderful he truly was. Jeff finally confessed his held feelings to Helen, and they eventually married. As students, they decided to postpone parenthood until they were financially stable and had established their careers. Years later, Helen and Jeff felt ready to start a family and welcomed a beautiful daughter, Alice. Alice was a loving and obedient child who made every effort to please her parents. The family traveled extensively. Jeff and Helen were eager to teach Alice about the world while learning alongside her. Helen did not return to work until her daughter started first grade. She spent those early years focused on her child's development, enrolling her in various activities like language lessons and choreography. Helen wanted her daughter to be well-rounded. However, as Alice grew older and became more independent, Helen decided it was time to end her 7-year maternity leave. Alice was self-reliant and responsible enough to stay home alone. The girl used to come home from school by herself, do her homework, and sometimes even cook dinner for her parents. It seemed like a perfect arrangement. However, things changed when a busy road was constructed near Alice's school. It became dangerous to walk there. Drivers tried to fly quickly through the intersection. There were not enough traffic lights and crosswalks yet. Helen now often left work early to get her daughter home, fearing her daughter might get hit by a car one day. Couldn't get permission from her boss to leave work early. Alice had come home by herself before and would always let her mother know when she had arrived safely. But on this day, Alice didn't send a message and didn't answer her phone. Worried, Helen left work and went home, only to find that Alice hadn't returned. Helen and her husband rushed to the school, where they learned that Alice had left as soon as school ended. They spoke to Alice's friends, who said they had parted ways at the usual spot near the store. From there, Alice's whereabouts were unknown. Helen and Jeff rushed to the police. A statement was taken, and the search for their child began immediately, with volunteers joining in. For 3 long, agonizing days, they were left in the dark, unable to find rest or eat. Tragically, one of the volunteers found his lifeless body hidden in the basement of an old house in a disadvantaged neighborhood. The person responsible for this atrocity was never found, although the search for the perpetrator continued. For Helen and Jeff, life came to a halt. Time passed, Jeff said, his gaze distant. Jamer looked at him, her heart aching for this man, his grief-stricken wife, and of course little Alice, this beloved little girl who was so needed by her parents, was gone. Meanwhile, Jamer, who felt unwanted and unloved, remained alive. Time passed, Jeff repeated. I gradually began to recover, to return to life, but Helen didn't. She was consumed by grief, and she blamed herself for what happened to Alice. She believed that if she had taken time off and walked Alice home like usual, none of this would have happened. Helen was continually burdened by heavy thoughts, weakening day by day. She was visibly deteriorating despite therapy and medication. She eventually resigned from her job because her performance was affected. And the thought of facing her boss, who stopped her from seeing her child on that ill-fated day, was unbearable. One terrible day, Jeff arrived home to find Helen upbeat. Her eyes sparkled feverishly, and her cheeks were flushed. "Come in," she said to her husband. "Sit down and eat. I'll check Alice's homework and join you." Jeff was taken aback. "What homework?" he asked. Helen disappeared into their daughter's room, and Jeff followed. At first, he thought he was hallucinating. Alice was sitting at the desk, her back to him, engrossed in her textbooks. She was wearing her favorite avocado pajamas. The scene was so familiar that it was surreal. Jeff initially thought it was another child, but it was actually a doll, which was designed for collectors and had a striking resemblance to real children, so much so that it was even unnerving. In her inconsolable state, Helen ordered a doll that resembled Alice. It was crafted from a photograph of the girl, capturing all her features, including her moles. However, it lacked the warmth of Alice's smile and the curious sparkle in her blue eyes. Jeff found the doll unsettling. And of course, he was truly alarmed by his wife's behavior. Yet, Helen seemed happy for the first time since the tragedy. Jeff thought it might be a coping mechanism or a way for her to accept what had happened. Nothing else had been able to alleviate her depression, but the doll seemed to help. However, Helen's behavior grew increasingly strange. She treated the doll as if it were their living daughter, preparing Alice's favorite meals, conversing with it, and even buying it clothes. Helen was drifting further from reality when she decided to take the doll to a children's movie. Jeff realized he needed to take action. He called for medical help. Helen was diagnosed with a serious stress-induced disorder and was admitted to a hospital. After nearly half a year of treatment, Helen's condition improved significantly. She was more aware of reality, although not fully recovered. Despite this progress, Helen's peculiarities persisted, which was unsettling. For instance, Helen insisted that a doll be in the car, specifically in a child's seat, although she didn't ask to bring the toy home. She refused to get in the car unless the doll was present. Helen explained her requirement by saying, "I realize that it's not our daughter. It's just comforting to see a familiar picture out of the corner of my eye." Jeff did not object, especially since the doctor stated that this request was harmless. It was merely a method for Helen to gradually and gently transition from her current state. Doctors assure that Helen will soon be completely recovered, Jeff said. Jamer, struggling to find the right words, simply said, "It's so frightening and sad." Jeff responded, "There's plenty of sadness in this world. Here you are, for example, a child who is in such a situation. Let's get in the car, you're freezing, and direct me to your house." Jam nodded and obediently sat in the passenger seat next to the driver's seat. The doll in the back seat, sitting in the baby booster, no longer seemed so terrifying. Instead, Jamer felt a profound sadness when she looked at it, causing tears to well up in her eyes. "I'm going to the hospital to pick up Helen," Jeff explained. "The doctors allowed me to take her for the weekend, and that's why this doll is here. It's what Helen needs for now." "I see," Jam responded. "They say I need to find something for her to do, something that will distract and inspire her. It's not an easy task." Helen used to love her job, but now she doesn't want to think about returning. "I think everything will be fine," Jay attempted to comfort Jeff. "Time, heals what happened to you." The man momentarily took his eyes off the road to look at his young passenger. "Will you tell me?" JMA hesitated. Jeff had been open and honest with her, sharing his life, his pain, all to ensure she felt safe getting in his car. He knew she would otherwise freeze on the journey. His honesty made it easier to reciprocate, but it would mean talking about the Coldwells and her psychiatric diagnosis. What if, Jeff? What if he leaves me at the hospital? What if he decides that I am genuinely ill? He's so kind. He didn't ignore an injured dog, Jam thought. The dog was now resting in the back seat, enjoying the warmth and peace. Surely a man like that would admit a mentally ill girl into a hospital, considering it his duty to help a sick individual. "Don't worry," Jeff seemed to notice Jam's hesitation. "Just tell me if you need help. But be honest, if you'd rather things stay as they are, I'll stay out of your life, I promise. But if there's anything I can do to assist you, just let me know." Jamer decided to open up about her life, something she had never done before. She took a deep breath and began to share her story. She spoke about the orphanage where conditions were harsh, yet no one abused or confined her. She talked about Lucy, the only person she truly missed, and her experiences with the Caldwells, describing what she had endured in that family proved challenging. As Jamer recounted her time at the Caldwells' farm, Jeff's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. He remained silent, listening attentively, only interjecting occasionally to ask clarifying questions. The answers seemed to shock him. Finally, they arrived at Jam's house. "Well, here we are," Jam said, smiling at Jeff. "Do you live here? Aren't you cold inside?" Jeff asked. "No, I have a working furnace," she replied. "Listen," Jeff said, turning to look at Jamer. "What you've experienced is awful. The Coldwells are criminals, and they need to be punished." Jamer nodded, a wave of relief washing over her. Jeff believed her without question. "You need to report everything. You need to give a statement to the police." "No," the girl shook her head. "I can't. They'll send me to the hospital. The Coldwells have labeled me as mad. That's why I've been hiding from everyone. I'm scared that if I appear in public, I'll be sent either to the hospital or back to them. I'm unsure which is worse." "Listen closely," the man responded. "You've been manipulated and intimidated. They've done this intentionally so you won't consider complaining. Any examination will prove that your diagnosis is false. You're a completely healthy child. They exploited your innocence and lack of experience and filled your head with this nonsense." Quite successfully, as it seems, Jamer nodded in agreement. "The way you're living here, this isn't a life for children or anyone. It's mere survival. You need to study, interact with your peers, and grow. Yet, I am still scared. Consider the other children in this family. Those frightening people might not stop with them. They could bring more children from orphanages and turn their lives into a nightmare. You're strong. You managed to escape. What about the others? Jamer remembered Mary's anxious eyes, meek Stacy, and pale, skinny Hayes. You might be right. I'll do it, the girl sighed. Great. I'll go get Helen now while you gather your things. Don't take much, you won't need them in your new life. Just the most essential items. 4 years passed. Jamer had grown up, and something significant had happened this year. She became a law student. This was all thanks to Jeff and Helen, who had taken care of her since the day Jeff found her on the road. Initially, they helped Jamer unofficially, and later they took legal custody of her. Jeff returned for Jamer that evening, and he wasn't alone. His wife sat in the passenger seat. She was beautiful and pale, with shadows under her eyes, but her gaze was clearly interested. She did not appear to be an absent, broken woman. Jeff, as soon as he took his wife from the hospital, told her the story of Jamer. Naturally, she was horrified and expressed her desire to put the Coldwells behind bars. People like that shouldn't be left free, Helen declared. Jeff agreed with her completely. Helen could help restore justice, as she had been a first-class lawyer before the unfortunate incident with her daughter. Having heard Jam's story, the woman felt motivated to act for the first time since the tragedy. Helen and Jeff brought Jamer from her shabby house to their spacious apartment with clean, comfortable furniture and a warm, fragrant bath. To Jamer, these everyday comforts felt incredibly luxurious and elite. Then came the process of recounting her experiences, which was difficult for Jamer. Remembering everything that happened and sharing the details was incredibly painful. At times, she couldn't hold back her tears. The thought of possibly having to face her tormentors was again unsettling. However, Helen assured Jamer that she wouldn't have to meet her foster parents again, a gesture for which Jamer was deeply grateful. Jamer spent some time in state institutions, starting with the Children's Hospital. She underwent examinations for 2 weeks. The doctors concluded that she was mentally healthy but slightly worn out, which wasn't surprising given Jamer's previous circumstances. Jamer found herself back in the orphanage, the same one she had left. Lucy, her old friend, had graduated and was gone. The tutors shrugged off questions about Lucy's fate. She doesn't keep in touch with us, they said indifferently. Despite this, Jamer didn't feel lonely or abandoned. She was frequently visited by Jeff and Helen, who brought gifts and expressed interest in her life. At first, Jamer thought their visits were solely related to Helen's case. However, even after Anna and Peter Caldwell were sentenced to long prison terms, their visits continued. Jamer realized that Helen's investigation was the case that brought the woman back to life. Helen had regained her vitality. She was once again filled with the desire and strength to fight injustice. Even her appearance changed. Her pallor faded, her gaze became confident and piercing, and her eyes sparkled with a thirst for life. Jamer was pleased to witness this transformation. During one visit, Jeff casually asked if Jamer would object to them becoming her legal guardians. Jamer was thrilled. She had never dared to dream of such a thing. Initially, there were complications, as Helen, a recent psychiatric patient, wasn't considered an ideal candidate for foster parent. Despite this, the couple managed to gain custody of Jamer. She began living with them, finally experiencing true happiness. Jeff and Helen never pushed Jamer. Instead, they gently guided and advised her, engaging in lengthy conversations. Jamer had never felt so needed and happy before. They also searched for Lucy, who lived on the city outskirts in a state-provided apartment for orphans. She worked as a store clerk. Jamer was thrilled to reconnect with her friend, and Lucy felt the same. Helen and Jeff brought the Coldwells' youngest children, Mary, Stacy, Hayes, into their family. These children required extensive rehabilitation due to the significant damage to their developing psyches caused by Peter and Anna. Helen, Jeff, and Jamer faced a long and challenging task, but they were prepared and eager to restore the children's sense of childhood. The elder Coldwells required more comprehensive care, resulting in their admission to a hospital with psychologists and psychotherapists, but the couple had no intention of leaving the elder Coldwells' children, who had faced greater hardships. They planned to continue their support even after the children's discharge. This, despite being adults by law, they were ill-equipped for life in society and needed assistance. Helen became Jamer's role model in every aspect. Jamer admired her beauty, intelligence, and determination, and all this inspired her to choose law school. Helen wholeheartedly supported her. Soon Jamer would embark on her studies and a new phase of life, and she knew that whenever she felt overwhelmed by the city's hustle and bustle, she could always retreat to Helen and Jeff. They provided a haven where she could rest, receive love and attention, and rejuvenate. The doll, too, had a new home. Helen suggested donating it to an orphanage during the peak of the Caldwell case. Jeff was happy to take the toy. It meant that his wife had finally recovered.